Welcome to Time to Press Pause, real life stories from the C-suite. I'm your host, Ellen Williams, CEO of The Salient Strategist, and today I'm speaking with Rajen Sheth, CEO and founder of KyronLearning. Rajen's story is all about a leap of faith. However, he discusses how it took 10 years of thinking and preparing for him to take that leap, and what he needed to learn during his pause to make his next steps impactful. Rajen Sheth is CEO and founder of KyronLearning, a public benefit company committed to using AI to help bring about equitable access to great one-to-one teaching for all students. Previously, Rajen was Vice President of Google Cloud AI and Industry Solutions as part of his 17-year career at Google. He built products that enabled enterprises to transform themselves through AI and for Google Cloud's key industries: healthcare, retail, financial services, media entertainment, and manufacturing. Early on, Rajen led the development of Android and Chrome for business and education, including the Android for Work products, Chromebooks for Education's product line, and Chromebooks and Chrome Browser for Work. Rajen also led product development for Google Apps for Work and Education, now known as G Suite, which is used by over 5 million businesses. Welcome, Rajen, to Time to Press Pause. I'm thrilled to have you here today.
Great. Well, I'm glad to be here today and looking forward to talking.
I am looking forward to hearing your story. And with the brief conversation that we already had, I have to say, you made my day, probably my week, by letting me know that you had previously bookmarked Time to Press Pause podcast before reaching out to me about being on it. So I'm thrilled to have you as a loyal listener and excited to have you as a guest. So please share your Press Pause story.
So what resonated me with actually about what you're doing is because I at one point had to press pause. It was a big shift in my own career that really resulted in a much better path for me. So I'll tell you a little bit about the story. So I had been working for Google for a very long time, worked for about 17 years at Google, and made a decision to walk into my boss's office, which was actually virtual at the time, and just quit. Had no idea what the next thing I was going to do, had nothing lined up, but I just quit, which was jarring because I had been there almost 2 decades. It was most of my adult existence that I had been at Google, but it was time to go and it was time to actually try something else. I had never imagined that I would do that by just kind of leaping off the edge and kind of hoping for the best, but it was the right thing to do. And so I'll give you a little bit more about how that came to be. The reason I joined Google is because of the purpose of what can technology do for people. And I think Google is a fantastic place to be able to actually do that kind of work and try to figure out how technology can actually apply to people. But what I started to see is that as our company grew and as kind of my position grew, it became less and less and less about that purpose and more and more and more about the business. And I started to realize, and especially kind of as I grew older, that what I really want to do is wake up every morning feeling like I'm going to be using that day for purpose, using that day to try to figure out how 20 years from now I can feel that I've left the world in a better place than I started with my career. For a long time, education was an area that I was very, very interested in, and that was a lot of that purpose. I come from a background of really kind of great education at long odds. And what I mean by that is I was fortunate to get a great education. But if you go back to my grandfather's generation, my grandfather on my father's side was an orphan in a small village in India. At the time, this was early 1900s, you kind of know that if you're an orphan, it's very, very hard to actually find a path to viability. And he found a way to get an education. And he was lucky. He had an uncle that helped him out and was able to get him into school. And then that lifted up the entire next generation. On my mom's side, my grandmother was a widow when she was 35, a single mother in India in 1955. And similar kind of thing that that in that kind of environment, your path to prosperity isn't great. But then she focused all of her attention on making sure every one of her five kids went to college, including, which was unusual at the time, making sure that her two girls went to college as well. My mom was the very first electrical engineering graduate from the state of Gujarat because of that push. And then that again lifted up all generations. And I benefited from all of that. So I want to make sure that what I do in my career makes it such that other people can benefit from this. I've worked a lot on education at Google, worked on things like Chromebooks for education, Google Workspace for education, and I kind of got to see firsthand the impact of when you put technology in the hands of people that haven't had it before, the kinds of things that they can go do. And I think there's even more potential for technology to provide better equitable access to education for more and more students. That was the purpose that I wanted to focus on. I was realizing that I wasn't able to do that in the path that I was going at that point. So I thought about it and thought about it, literally thought about it for almost 10 years. And it finally kind of hit upon this realization that if I didn't do it now, I'm not going to do it. I could have just followed the easy path of just continuing along that journey and just, letting years continue to pass, but decided finally I'm going to take the leap. And so hence made that decision, walked in 3 days into my boss's office and quit. Definitely one of the scariest things I did. What was even scarier was 2 months after that when I actually left and had my last day at Google. And then the day after, all of a sudden, everything stopped. No more emails coming in, no more phone calls coming in, no more meetings, no more anything. That was scary, but also very, very freeing. I did it that way deliberately. I had thought a lot about what I wanted to do before that, but I kind of realized that in order to really figure out what I want to do, you have to press pause and you have to actually have that silence for a while in order to really then figure out what's right and what's next, and then give myself the time to then try different routes and figure out what to do. When I left, what I was telling myself is that I was going to go start a company in education, but I deliberately went as far afield of that as I possibly could to explore different paths and then to try to find what was the right path for me. I took basically about a month or so and pretty much did most of nothing, but did the kinds of things that I didn't get a chance to do while I was working. I created a self-made meditation camp for myself and did that for several days. I recorded a music album. It was one of the things that's one of my hobbies, but I never got a chance to do something like that in while working. I actually wrote my own songs and recorded my own music, did all of that. And then I just started talking to people. And I think one of the things that I thought was surprising was how much of a network I could create. I was lucky in that I had a good network, but I realized that there was a network that I could create that was much broader than the network that I had. And I started talking to people that introduced me to other people that introduced me to other people, talked to many, many educators and understood kind of what was happening in education at the time, and then finally then honed in on what I wanted to do. And it's interesting because where I ended up was actually where I started. It was the ideas I was starting to think about while I was at Google was what actually where I ended up. And about a year later, founded KyronLearning with that idea of equitable access to high quality education as a public benefit company. And so came up with that idea really around using AI to be able to create conversational videos that feel like you're talking to a teacher and having a lesson with a teacher. So what we did was there are these videos where a teacher teaches you a little bit, but then asks you a question, and then you go back and forth with that teacher on a question. It's all virtual, all asynchronous, all run by AI. And really kind of then glommed onto that because I saw that students were struggling. They needed conversation to be able to actually help them get to a point where they understood. And so a year later, we started the company and then has been great ever since. Been going on for about 3 years now. And I now have gotten to a point where I feel like every day I wake up for a purpose. It's probably been the hardest journey I've ever had to do, but I feel that purpose every single day.
That's fabulous. It's so valuable to wake up and feel a purpose. It's definitely been a recurring theme on the podcast. So thank you for sharing that story. There's a lot of different elements, and you said a lot of really interesting things. First of all, I am going to tap into what you ended by saying, and I'm going to follow some dots. You had said that when you took your pause, you did some personal things and hobbyist things, and then you started talking to people and you realized you could create a network. And one of the last things you said was that students need conversation. And yet that's what you did in order to learn about what was going on in education and help you hone your company to what you had. And here's another interesting thing you said, what I was telling myself I wanted. And sometimes those don't always wind up being the same, what you wind up doing and what you told yourself, but in your case, it
Yeah.
did. So, can you talk a little bit about how during your pause talking to people helped you hone that, and also how that relates to the importance of conversation for students?
Yeah, I think it's a very good point that I think that process that I followed to learn is the same process that we're encouraging students to follow. I learned a lot by talking to people, and by talking to people and having conversation, I think what I learned is two things. One is that there's a lot that I don't know. By listening to others, I can pick up, and there were things I assumed I knew, but I realized I didn't know. And then the vice versa, there's a lot that I do know that I can push forward, that I can contribute. I think those were key things that I started to learn by having conversation. One of the biggest things is that I think a lot of people in technology think that they know education, and they don't. I thought I knew education. In fact, I worked on a lot of products in education at Google, and so I thought I knew education, but I really didn't until I started talking to teachers. And then I really got a much better sense of, what do they face in the classroom? What are the issues? What could actually help those issues? What isn't going to help those issues, etc. By talking to teachers, I realized I had a lot to learn. And so I learned a lot through that process and learned kind of how technology can fit into education and exactly where it can help and have the biggest impact. I think it really goes to the same thing with students, which is that I think you learn a lot more through conversation than you do by just listening to a 45-minute video or by thinking that you know something and trying to kind of project what you know. And by going back and forth, you have opportunities to ask questions or dig into areas or get questions asked to you that are probing that make you think. And I think that's a much better way of learning.
Yeah, probing to make you think. So you said you were thinking for
Mm,
10 years. So you were doing a lot of thinking before you took your leap of faith.
mhm.
You said, if you didn't do it now, then when?
Mhm.
That all makes sense to me. But then how do you actually muster up the courage to take that action? Talk is easy.
Yeah, and it is why it took 10 years to do that because I was very lucky that I was in a really great situation. Google's a fantastic company, got to do some amazing things there. Taking that leap was really hard as a result of that. And I think anytime you're in a place for that long, really the cement dries around your feet. I know a lot of people that leave their job every few years and go and do something different, and that's kind of how I was early in my career. And then I got to Google and I loved it, and so I stayed for almost 2 decades. But the cement really dries around your feet. It makes it whereas theoretically you can just pick up your feet and move. The mental cement is so thick that you actually can't do that, or you don't think you can do that. And in my case, part of what I started to see was that I thought, oh yeah, there'll always be kind of a tomorrow to be able to do that thing that I wanted. One thing that was starting to happen in my personal life is I was seeing more and more people my age actually get sick. Some people pass away, things like that, which was really awful to see. But it was a bit of a wake up call for me that the amount of time that I think I have may not be the amount of time that I have. That I need to take advantage of every moment that you do have. That got me to realizing, okay, I got to I just got to do it, take the leap and bear the consequences, because what's going to happen is going to be worth it. And the other thing I realized too is that it's not like by taking the leap I become a different person. I'm still the same person with the same skills. And so if I want to continue back down the path that I was on, potentially a way I can go back and do it. But if I didn't do that and got until much later in my career, there's a path that I wanted to do, which was to go start a company for purpose, that I never would be able to do.
Timing is important, certainly in many aspects of life. What you were starting to observe in your peers offered that wake up call to maybe I don't have as much time. That's a pause in itself when you
Yeah.
realize that. And then you need to decide what you want to do. You said something really interesting that I've never heard before: mental cement. I'm a very visual person, and I think that speaks volumes where people really are just stuck, right?
Mhm.
Stuck in the cement. So, how long have you had your new organization?
It's been about 3 years now.
And your approach to being the leader of this organization, besides bringing your purpose and bringing your knowledge, what are you imparting on your staff around pressing pause, thinking things through to avoid? I know 3 years, there's probably not any mental cement yet, but with your insight around that, what kind of communications and conversations are you having with your staff to keep them on purpose?
Yeah, I think it's a really great question. I think that there are two parts. One is always keeping the purpose in mind, is that kind of ongoing thread. And there are always times where the things we do can kind of veer away from the purpose that we have, but it takes strong leadership to make sure that the purpose continues. And so that's something that I've had to really make sure that we focus on. Wherever we go, and we've pivoted a lot as an organization, wherever we go, we're still going somewhere with that purpose in mind. As an example, we started in fourth grade math as the area that we were first building tools in. And we moved to a very different area with kind of much more powerful AI into higher education. And so working with colleges, professional skilling, things like that. But the purpose is still the same. So, in the case of fourth grade math, we were helping students that would otherwise fail algebra. In this space, we're helping students get college degrees and pass college where they otherwise would never get a college degree. And I think, again, very, very different manifestations with the same purpose. But the second thing on the flip side is to realize that we can pivot, and we can pivot quickly. And I think that is probably one of our strongest advantages versus a big company. Things that for me would have taken many, many months in a big company now can be done in days or weeks. And part of it is realizing that you don't have that mental cement, making sure that you realize that the cement is mental as opposed to physical. And you can pick up and move in this other direction, or pick up and move in that other direction.
I love that you went back to the mental cement, that if it's there, realize it is only mental. It doesn't prevent you from the pivot or a physical change.
Right,
So
right.
I like that you've sort of managed both sides of that comment. Well done. So
No,
I
thank
have
you.
one last question for you. What advice would you have to other leaders for when they could identify it might be time for them to press pause?
You should be looking at two extremes. One is your day to day, and then another is look at the aspect from 20 or 30 years from now. Are you waking up excited with what you're doing every single day? And is that something that you're motivated by? And then similarly, 30 years from now, if you look back at your career, would you be proud of what you're doing right now? And would you feel like, as a result of what you're doing right now, you have made a positive impact on the world, or gotten to wherever your goal is? And for me, it was that positive impact on the world. If either of those are out of line, then you need to really think about that. And especially if both of them are out of line, then it's really a good time to hit pause, because you get the chance to rethink everything. A lot of times I think people think about, okay, I'm going to go from this to this, and I'm going to make it continuous. Like I'm going to be working in this job and I'm going to jump over and do this other job. And that works a lot of times. And I did that for 25 years. Every job I ended, I started the next job on the following Monday, and kind of did that throughout my entire career. So the first time I kind of leaped off the cliff. And it was really freeing, much more so than I would have thought, because it gave me that opportunity to reflect, which you don't get to do otherwise in your career.
I've jumped off that ledge a couple times.
And it's scary. It's not an easy thing to do, but it's necessary at times.
It is. I agree. It may not always be easy, but in those moments where you do it, it's necessary. It's a decision that you've come to, and hopefully a good decision.
Right.
Rajen, thank you. This was really eye-opening. Your story was fantastic. Thank you so much for sharing with me. And I came out with some great little phrases that I think I may start using. So thanks for the mental cement.
Absolutely. No, it's a delight to be on the podcast.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Time to Press Pause. If you're interested in learning more about Rajen, go to KyronLearning.com. That's KYRON learning.com. If you're interested in learning more about me, go to thesalientstrategist.com. And please listen again wherever you listen to your podcasts.